So, let's talk about an idea that on the surface seems like a total no-brainer: evidence-based medicine. It's a pretty simple concept, right? Doctors should use the absolute best scientific evidence available to treat their patients. I mean, it's pretty much the cornerstone of modern medicine. But what if that cornerstone has some serious cracks in it?
You see, when evidence-based medicine, or EBM, burst onto the scene back in the early 90s, it wasn't just a new idea, it was a revolution. The folks behind it were basically declaring war on the old way of doing things, where a doctor's gut feeling or what they'd seen in their own practice was often good enough. EBM promised to sweep all that away and replace it with cold, hard facts from scientific research.
Okay, but here's the kicker. What if the central claim of EBM, the whole reason it exists, that it's a better way to practice medicine, can't actually be proven by its own super high standards? That's the huge, provocative question we're going to dig into.
So, the initial promise of EBM was all about shaking things up. It wanted to throw out subjective intuition and bring in objective proof. The goal was to standardize care so that every single patient, no matter where they were, got the treatment that science had already proven to be the best. And wow, did that idea catch on.
I mean, look at this official definition. It sounds perfect. Who could argue with that? And it was a massive success. The phrase evidence-based just exploded. It wasn't just in medicine anymore. It was in social work, in policymaking, everywhere. It became the ultimate buzzword, the seal of approval. But here's the thing. For a movement that's all about proof, just being popular doesn't prove anything.
And this is where we find the first major crack in the foundation. It really comes down to the most obvious question you could possibly ask. Is there any actual hard evidence that doctors who practice evidence-based medicine get better results for their patients?
You see, the entire EBM movement, the whole shebang, is built on this one really powerful assumption, that a doctor who follows the evidence will do a better job. It just feels logical, right? It seems like it has to be true. But is it?
And this is the knockout punch. This is the central paradox, right here in a quote from the very paper that launched the movement. Its own founders admitted, right from the start, that they couldn't prove their system was better using their own gold standard, the randomized trial. They literally said it's unprovable. So the foundation of EBM isn't actually built on evidence, it's built on a belief, which is the very thing it was trying to get rid of.
So that lack of proof is a huge deal. But believe it or not, the problems go even deeper. There are some fundamental issues with the rules of evidence that EBM itself created. Let's peel back a few more layers here. You gotta understand, a huge part of the sales pitch for EBM was that it was anti-authority. It was about empowering every single doctor on the front lines. They could go straight to the research, look at the evidence with their own two eyes, and make their own decisions. No more just blindly following what some famous professor said.
So that was the dream. But what actually happened? Well, it turns out most doctors are, incredibly busy. They don't have time to read and analyze every single new study. So they end up relying on summaries and guidelines written by a new group of experts, these anonymous appraisers. So EBM didn't get rid of authority. It just swapped out the old authorities for a new, faceless set.
Okay, this next one gets right to the engine room of how EBM is supposed to work. Its main tool is this thing called the evidence hierarchy, a ranking of what kind of study is best. But the problem is, there's no single agreed-upon hierarchy. Huge influential organizations like the US CDC and the Center for EBM in the UK have different rulebooks. They can't even agree on what top-tier evidence means.
And this might be the most ironic twist in this entire story. How did they decide on these rankings in the first place? How did they decide that a meta-analysis is better than a single big trial? It wasn't based on some massive scientific study. It was based on, wait for it, expert opinion. A group of smart people got in a room and decided. It was based on the very lowest form of evidence in their own system. The whole thing is built on a foundation it claims to reject.
And that brings us to the last big challenge, what EBM even considers to be evidence. It has a really narrow focus. It loves numbers, stats, and things you can measure from clinical trials. But what about the human side of things? What about research that explores a patient's experience, their values, the context of their life? EBM really struggles with that stuff, and it risks missing a huge piece of the puzzle.
So you can imagine, with all these criticisms piling up, the folks behind EBM realized they had to adapt. Lately, you'll hear them talk more about integrating a doctor's expertise and, crucially, the patient's values. But let's take a look at how the patient was actually treated in the original EBM model. Okay, so this is the official playbook, right? The 5 steps they teach for practicing EBM. 1. Ask a clinical question. 2. Find the evidence. 3. Analyze it. 4. Apply it. 5. See what happens. Looks pretty straightforward, doesn't it? But look closely. Someone's missing, aren't they? Where's the patient in all of this? Bam! Step 4. That's it. That's the first time the actual human being in the room really becomes relevant. In this model, the patient isn't a partner. They're a passive object. They're the person you apply the evidence to after the doctor has done all the smart, important work. It's not a conversation, it's an application.
And this example just shows you perfectly why that model falls short. Think about it. 2 brothers, identical health problem. They both look at the exact same scientific evidence about statins. One brother says, yep, sign me up for the medication. The other says, no thanks, I'd rather try to fix this with diet and exercise. Now, which one is right? Both of them. They're both making totally reasonable choices, but they're based on their personal values, not just the data. The evidence alone can't give you the answer.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap. We're talking about a system that can't actually prove it's superior, that accidentally created a new set of faceless authorities, that operates with conflicting rulebooks, and that kind of forgets about the patient until the very end. It's pretty clear that evidence-based medicine is at a major crossroads. So where does it go from here?
Well, the paper we're drawing from lays out 2 possible paths, 2 futures for EBM. One is the thoughtful future, where EBM evolves. It accepts its weaknesses, it focuses on making well-reasoned decisions, and it truly brings the patient's values into the conversation from the very beginning. But then there's the dogmatic future, where it doubles down, becomes rigid, and just insists on its own supremacy despite all these deep flaws.
And so that leaves us with one final and really crucial question to think about. EBM isn't going away, but how it evolves is everything. Because when we strip away all the theory and the hierarchies and the debates, the only question that really matters is this: what does good evidence truly mean when it's your health on the line?